Okay, everybody, welcome. This is Habakkuk and Paul, episode 8. Does Paul seek increase from what is not his by right? Habakkuk 2, verse 6. And this is part of our series of Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. That is, they claim to be prophets, that you take their word as the word of God, yet they're pretending to be Christians and inwardly are ravening wolves. All right, and just to update on where we are in our uh, complete series here. Last time we proved that Paul had an insatiable desire, as Saul, to gather all nations to himself, which is he was literally using messianic passages to apply to himself, as if he should be the world ruler. And is Paul like death to us? Thus matching three more factors in Habakkuk 2, verse 5. Today we're going to look at verse 6. We're going to look at one factor, and when we look at verse 6, we actually found two more. So there were 9 factors in verses 4 and 5, and now we have 2 more in verse 6. Okay, and just because some people might not know that this is part of a prophecy, they've all heard of, Habakkuk 2:4, that's talking about the just shall live by faith, which it doesn't say, which the people who have already been in this know what that's about. It says that the righteous shall live by his faith, and it's talking about this evil person. So this evil person has some faith or faithfulness that is worth emulating. And by the way, I just want to point out that that excludes that this is about the Chaldeans, because they had no faith or faithfulness that you would live by his faith. And that's the key to this verse, to know it's not about any historical group prior to this time or a nation. It's about a human being. Okay, and a refresher for those people who have not been watching earlier is we went and broke down Habakkuk 2, 4, and 5. This is just these two verses. And we did it in the KJV, and we did it with the Jewish Publication Society, sort of as a control that we are hearing the actual meanings. And sometimes scholarship got better, and they were able to correct a few things, and that's why the Jewish Publication Society in 1917 had some differences. Anyway, and we've identified just nine characteristics in just the first 2 verses. And now let's take a look at verse 6. Okay, so here we are looking at the passage or the verse we're going to focus on today. Habakkuk 2, verse 6. This is the last T passage in Habakkuk, so that's the end of the prophecy. That's very clear. Although I think verse 20 may be God's way of bringing something to mind about Paul again. Anyway, so this starts off talking about, shall not all these take up a parable against him? So we're still talking about the him, the he of the prior 2 verses, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, quote, and number 10 is the one we're going to focus on today. Woe to him that increases that which is not his. And that's the same in Jewish Publication Society, so that's a very solid verse, and we can proceed to investigate whether that applies to Paul. So the words increases what is not his could be for a whole bunch of reasons. Could be fraud, could be robbery, could be some sort of appeal that puts something in his pocket that belongs to other people. So we just have to see. Again, lots of times you read the prophecy, and then when you see it fulfilled, you can figure it out. Well, I mean, here we have an example, 2 Corinthians 11:8. I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. Some evidence that Paul's confessing to what we're talking about. Okay, now we're going to get into passages where Paul teaches that you have to support for a living the ministers who serve you, and whether that's biblical or not. And it isn't, because it violates Jesus' words here, and we're going to see what Jesus teaches about how the apostles were instructed not to take money, and how they were told how to support themselves through the law of hospitality. So let me show you this passage. This is Matthew 10:8 and 9. Basically, you can, verse 8, Jesus says, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely you have received. You've received the gospel at no charge. Freely give. Don't charge. Don't ask for any money. Just preach and teach, and God's going to take care of you. How? Look below. So first he's going to say, provide neither gold, nor silver, nor brass in your purses, nor scrip for your journey, neither 2 coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves.
for the workman is worthy of his meat. So basically it says you don't need to carry along suitcases. Just go in the next town and rely upon this. What is he talking about? Well, this is a phrase that is a paraphrase of the law of hospitality that's in both Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, and basically says you can go stay with the person for a couple of days. You can just be given room and board, food, and everything like that. But after a while, if you want to stay further, you have to start doing work and chores around the house. But if that happens, you're entitled to pay. And in that case, the workman is worthy of his wage. As a result, that's how he was saying the ministers, the apostles, would support themselves. They would not otherwise ask for any money for themselves, and they wouldn't operate that way. So, and then it says, into whatsoever city or town you shall enter, inquire who it is worthy. So it's similar to the law of hospitality again, and there abide till you go then. So basically that's how you would survive from town to town, and you could spread the gospel with no suitcases, nothing on your back, and each town you would meet another family and stay and get paid while you took care of their home, but you would never take money from the people. And why would Jesus want that? It's pretty obvious. If you're getting money from Gentiles, for example, you'd be bribed, basically. So you can't tell them, don't eat meat sacrificed to idols, because you're going to get dependent on their money if you're not working. If you're just totally relying upon them, you'll shape your gospel so that they don't fire you. And believe me, I've seen it firsthand how congregations can try to shape what their minister says. And Jesus gave us a rule that would prevent that. And this is how it was supposed to operate. It doesn't operate that way almost ever. And by the way, that only changed with Constantine. He made priests for the first time, and then he paid them. And they had never gotten money. I mean, so this was a total transformation of the entire fabric of the church changed when he did that in around 325 in that era. Okay, so the first proof about did Paul increase what is not his by right? Did he establish something contrary to Jesus that he does not have a legal right for? Well, here's a passage. And you're going to go, what? Why are you citing this one? Deuteronomy 25:4 is one of the shortest verses in the Torah, with no preceding or succeeding verse amplifying it or setting it up. It reads just this: do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. So in other words, when you're treading out the grain with an ox like to feed on the grass which it's treading on. So it has energy and can keep going. And the law of God says, do not put a muzzle on the ox so it cannot tread. And so in other words, you'd frustrate the ox that it couldn't even take a break and eat some food. So that's a command from God. And do we know that God cares for animals? Yes, Jesus said a sparrow doesn't fall to the ground without the care of God, right? So many other examples. And Jesus says, if a pig falls into the pit on a Sunday, you can, even on Sunday, on Sabbath, you can go in and rescue it, because the life of the pig is more important than worrying about anything else about Sabbath. Just go save the life of the animal. So there's all kinds of laws like that. Puts animals at a pretty high level. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at a passage which seems to be where Paul is trying to increase a right to something that he does not have a right to. We saw from Jesus that he doesn't have a right to make a living from the gospel. He must not even try to do that. He can make wages from working at a person's house where you've been taken in under the law of hospitality. Someone worthy you have to stay with, and that's how it's done. But he's going to create a whole new right, and he's going to claim it actually comes from the law of Moses, which is odd because he claims the law of Moses was given by angels who are no gods, and they're weak and beggarly. And why do you foolish Galatians want to observe Sabbath from the law when it's issued by angels who are no gods and weak and beggarly? So very self-contradictory of that. So this is extremely self-interested when you look at it. So let's just listen to it, see what you think. For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Is it oxen God is concerned about? Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt. This is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. In the same manner, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. Now, by the way, that last verse 14, people don't understand. He's saying that
he's now proven that the verse about the oxen, retranslated through the Paul use of flipping completely in something that doesn't say something into something else. This is what he means. That verse now means the Lord commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. That's what he means. And he transitioned there by using this idea that it's the same as, when you plow in hope, you reap in hope. But in terms of what the verse says, it did not say anything that Paul said. But it gets worse, because now he's going to actually rope in that rule to help out getting not just a preacher, and not just a preacher and a teacher, but also get the elders on the cash cow who direct the affairs of the church. They get money, but especially the preachers and teachers. So let's listen to this. 1 Timothy 5, verses 17 to 18. I'm sure Timothy was very glad to hear this because he wants some advancement and a career. If the verse 17, the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those who work is preaching and teaching. For scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. So apparently, it looks like, is if they do preaching and teaching, they would probably get twice the pay. I mean, I'm just extrapolating a little bit here. And the proof of this is a verse that has nothing to do with preaching and teaching. It has nothing to do with anything like that. It's involving an ox, which he's just completely eviscerated. Right? This is unbiblical hermeneutics. Unbiblical. So I have to ask the question, can these passages from Paul represent anything but a blatant and heinous self-interested apostasy against what Paul had insisted was God's still operative command in Deuteronomy 25, verse 4, contrary to all his anti-law teachings that the law was given by angels, Galatians 3:19, 4:19. And what it actually said is being twisted into a self-serving, fraudulent command to support Paul and his administration's staff is nothing short of robbery. Nobody can justify this. Nobody. It's a theological crime to say a verse of God about an ox. God doesn't care for ox, so who was this intended for? It was all together for our benefit? Oh my goodness. What cannot people believe? But I want you to know, I'm not the first one who saw this problem. Macarius Magnus, who was a very good Christian theologian, did commentaries that were just, about Jesus and what we need to live like and all this kind of stuff. But when he got to this passage, he went perplexed. He was apoplectic. He was in shock that this is in his book called the Apocrypticus, book 3, paragraphs 30-36. This is around 300 AD. So apparently Constantine and his crew didn't find this book in time to destroy it, and it survived. So here we go. That he, Paul, dissembles, that is, pretends to uphold the gospel for the sake of vainglory and the law for the sake of covetousness is plain from his words, and these are the words that preceded the discussion about the ox passage in Deuteronomy. Whoever goes to war at his own charges, ? Who shepherds the flock and does not eat of the milk of the flock, ? 1 Corinthians 9:7. And in his desire to get hold of these things, he calls on the law as a supporter of his covetousness, saying, quote, or does the law say these things? For in the law of Moses it is written, thou shalt not muzzle an ox that is treading out the corn. Then he adds a statement which is obscure and full of nonsense by way of cutting off the divine forethought from the brute beast, saying, does God take care of the oxen, or does he say it on our account? On our account it was written. Verse 10. It seems to me that in saying this, he is mocking the wisdom of the Creator as if it contained no forethought for the things that had long ago been brought into being. And then he cites several biblical proofs that God does care for animals. Wherefore, I am amazed at such an impostor who pays such solemn respect to the law because he is insatiable for the sake of getting a sufficient contribution from those who are subject to him. And that has to be the ultimate. He's told everyone the law doesn't even apply. And then he uses it to get money. And it's the only verse he ever cites to prove the ministers of a church of serving Jesus Christ who said that you freely give, you freely receive, you freely must give. And the only way to support yourself is through the law of hospitality, where you actually have to work for a living with your labor. And yet he's made up this complete
fraudulent reading of a verse that has nothing to do with supporting people who preach and teach or who are elders. It's a theological crime. That's what this is. And I also want to show you how ingrained that Jesus' views were in the early church about not doing what Paul's doing. There's a book called the Didache, or Didache, some people say, but I believe it's pronounced Didache, or Teaching the Apostles, was found in the 1800s. And now, by the way, it was found in an active monastery as a book they had on the shelf, but it dated from the hundreds. It was that old. It was very old. As apostolic sayings of the 12 apostles. The apostles are recorded teaching us to give room and board to Christ's messengers for 1 or 2 days. That is, using the law of hospitality in Leviticus, in which Jesus alluded to in Matthew 10. Okay, I'm assuming that's why they did this. But, quote, if he remains a third day, he is a false prophet. This is quoted in Edwin Johnson's Antiqua Mater, 1887, at page 57. And then the Didache continues and spoke about sermons asking for money. How did that go? Whoever says in his spirit, give me money or any other things, you shall not listen to him, at page 64. So this whole idea of asking for money was understood as that's a big foul. You don't do it. If somebody even wants to stay in your home, which is Jesus' command, that you can use the law of hospitality. And I think what this is saying, if they're only there for and not willing to work and help the house, you did have to give hospitality if they just want to sit there and do nothing. But there was apparently some custom that, after a couple of days, you can't just stay here and live and eat off us, so we'll give you a couple of days. But after the third day, if you're just there to suck in food, well, you're not doing anything. You got to help around the house. So this shows you what I'm saying is built and integrated into the church, in the earliest church, is how they had to live, how they had to survive. And you could not, in a preaching setting, ever ask for money. That was just a big foul. Okay, so far in the Habakkuk examination of chapter 2, and we're looking at verse 6, factor number 10. That one also applies to Paul. He sought increase of what is not his by right. All right, so I hope this helped edify you, and you're getting the idea that there is a prophecy about Paul in Habakkuk, and there's only one more that's absolutely necessary to prove, and then the optional one is number 20, which is about God says, I'm still in my temple. And we'll see if God meant that for Paul too. All right. God bless. I hope this helped everybody. Ciao.